To discover the imperial cities and old capitals of Morocco is to travel through unceasingly renewed and breathtaking landscapes, as well as an architectural, cultural, artistic, and human heritage. Each one of these mythical cities was indeed founded by a great Arab or Berber dynasty, which made them their capital city at some historical turning point.
The imperial cities, Fez, Marrakech, Meknes and Rabat, were the capitals of the kingdom, successively or in turns. A kingdom that saw the light of day, or had its beginnings in any case. At the end of the 9th century, with the arrival of the first monarchic dynasty, the Idrises, Idris became Idris I, was the descendant of Ali, the son-in-law of the Prophet. He was hunted by the Caliph of Baghdad, who wanted to have him assassinated. So he decided to distance himself as much as possible from Saudi Arabia and arrived in Fez. He was able to be recognized as Imam by the Berber population, who were mostly not yet converted to Islam. After the Idrises, who reigned for a century, there were 5 successive dynasties. The Almoravids, who settled in Marrakesh, were Berber Normans. They came from the south and arrived at this luscious oasis at the foot of the high Atlas Mountains where they settled. The Almoravids were succeeded by the Almohads, who arrived at the head of a cavalry. They came from the south and were utilitarians. They believed in the unity of God. The word Almohad even means those who affirm the unity of God. They were extremely harsh people who, unlike their predecessors, caused a great deal of suffering for the very small Christian minority, as well as the Jews. They wanted to impose the belief in one God. The Almohads were succeeded by the Marinids, who chose Fez as their capital. In Fez, the Marinids decorated the city with splendid buildings. They were excellent builders, very refined people. They ceded power to the Saadians, who moved back to Marrakesh. They also built a necropolis for themselves, the famous Saadian tombs, which were unknown until 1917. Next, we reach the 17th century. And it's the Alawites, also descendants of Ali, the son-in-law of the Prophet, who take power. Amongst the first rulers, the second is the famous Moulay Ismail, who left behind the legacy of a bloody and cruel leader, which he was. But he was above all a visionary, who truly built, although he did so on the acquisitions of those who came before him. He laid the foundations of the Moroccan state. He created administration and revived the city of Meknes, which was completely asleep before he made it his capital. The Alawite dynasty has lasted the longest as it continues today, with King Mohammed VI. He is descendant of his ancestors who arrived in the 17th century.
A big king, big city, wrote the well-known Maghrebian historian Ibn Khaldun in the 14th century. When a Moroccan dynasty chose its residence at Fez, Marrakesh, or Meknes, the city, which then became the capital, had to be the most perfect expression of timely architectural achievements. The imperial cities of Morocco always present the same diagram, a dense urban structure tightened between ramparts. Large axes connect the doors of the enclosure in the middle of the tangle of the narrow streets. Despite this apparent disorder, the building of these cities follows certain logical imperatives. The central position of the Great Mosque, the religious and ethnic segregation, the differentiation between residential and commercial districts. The narrow streets constitute a true web which connects the inside to the outside. In order to enter Fez's walled city, you may step through one of the many gates that surround the city, such as Bab Boujeloud, the Blue Gate, built in the 12th century under the reign of the First Great Dynasty. Fez, a millenary city, was the first Oriental-style city in Morocco. Around 900 AD, Idris I, an Arabian immigrant, and his son founded a Berber town with a strong rural base along a wadi called Fez.
The first dynasty, the Idrises, and Idris II in particular, developed a very aggressive economic policy. It established a very prosperous class of merchants, influential people, and the upper class. And it made the city a real economic power.
Une véritable puissance locale, mais une puissance économique.
Over the centuries, Fez became a political and intellectual capital in Morocco, then a center for international meetings and exchanges. Nowadays, with a population of approximately 1 million, Fez is the third largest city of Morocco.
When the Marinids arrived, they gave a boost to the city. To give you an idea, in the 12th century, there was 120,000 houses in Fez.
The Marinid dynasty was the second ruling dynasty to preserve the greatness and splendor of the capital, from the middle of the 13th century to the middle of the 15th century. There are a wide variety of palaces in the Medina. The Riyadh Mokri Palace belonged to the Grand Vizier, whose illustrious family was linked to the Marinid princes. He enjoyed living there in the vicinity of the court. This fabulous residence is now home to the Institute of Traditional Building Crafts. The house is undoubtedly an inspiration to the students, with its carved and painted doors, its black and white marble floor only rivaled by its sculpted and painted ceilings, and its wonderful views.
This kind of house constructed around a garden is called a riad. A door opened onto the street. There was a small, dark entrance, and through a hallway you reach what is called the riad, the courtyard or the interior garden, which was completely dazzling.
The gardens are the best in Fez, full of fruit trees, jasmine, honeysuckle, rosemary, or lavender.
When you're outside these houses, you wouldn't suspect their splendor because, like any self-respecting bourgeois, one didn't make too much of a show of their wealth. If we dwell on the houses of Fez, another interesting trait is that they are built around a patio, in the center of which there was a fountain, because water is always present in fine homes. There were 2 stories and roof terraces. We should also talk about these roof terraces, because there's a magnificent thing in Fez. There is a great Moroccan writer, Fatima Mernissi, who wrote very mischievous, funny, and interesting books about Fez. She wrote in particular about these roof terraces, because women did not have the right to go out. When they went out, they had to be entirely covered by their veils. But they could go up on the roof terraces. It was their oxygen. There, they were sheltered from the view by 2-meter walls. And on the roof terraces, the women could communicate and speak to each other from one terrace to another. There were also illicit love affairs. The Tharo brothers, writers, spoke of the rooftop terraces of Fez, saying that they were the places where suspended loves unfolded.
The Marinid era was characterized by the urban environment of Fez al-Bali, ancient Fez, as witnessed by some still current edifices. Security bodies can be associated with ramparts, commercial bodies with fountains and souks, places of worship with mosques, and finally, public and private areas with hammams and houses. Later, the Pasha el-Glawi, another illustrious man, also had his own palace in the city. Came from a warrior tribe existing since the 18th century. He was a military, political, and spiritual leader. The palace covers some 13,000 square meters and is composed of 17 edifices. It comprises more than 1,000 rooms, 4,000 doors and windows, 2 large gardens, a cemetery, Moorish baths, an oven, and a garage. The number of the different decorative motifs in a single room exceeds 250. No room is alike in the whole palace. You can see here that the indigo seems still fresh, as if it had been put yesterday. All the furniture was represented in 2 copies, one Moroccan, one European. The kitchen was operating 24 hours per day, and when El Glawi was in the palace, the cooks used to prepare 7 different tagines for each meal, so that the master of the place could choose one in the last moment.
Fez, which often called the Athens of Africa at the time, was a city that had a great intellectual and economic prestige. It was a crucial crossroad for trade, because all of the caravans that brought gold and spices came from the south, passing through Fez.
Souk El Atarin is the grocer's souk, where dates and walnuts are traded. It is undoubtedly the most colored marketplace in Fez. Situated in the Cabinet district, Nejarin is a former fondouk, caravanserai, which has been turned into a museum. The sober structure and wood decoration lay on white marble pillars. Everything is beautifully presented and reflects a great sense of harmony. After the fall of Grenada in 1492, Fez became the main heir of the Hispano-Maghrebian civilization. It received many influences transmitted by the refugees from Andalusia, such as the different kinds of embroidery, the brocart weaving, or the wooden decorative motifs for architectural use. In Fez, an intellectual and manual capital, there are some tens of thousands of craftspeople. In 1923, 162 different corporations had been counted. Their number shows the importance of crafts in the Medina's economy. Sepharine is a pretty shaded square where the hammering of the copper tools can be heard. Close to Sepharine Square, a range of smells leads to the Tanners district, where the craftsmen carry out particular work, for the city is well known for its highly skilled craftspeople, whose expertise is jealously guarded and passed down from father to son for generations. The skins are soaked in tannin baths to make them more flexible and rot-proof. Afterwards, they can be dyed. Tannery is a millinery corporation. Situated in the heart of the Medina, the Mnebi Palace is one of the most beautiful monuments in Fez. It took the very finest Moroccan craftsmen a full 15 years to complete in the late 19th century. It was the residence of the defense minister under the Sultan's reign, before the establishment of the French protectorate over Morocco by the Treaty of 1912. As a cultural and spiritual capital, Fez promoted Muslim religion by building mosques and madrasas where the students came from afar to study theology.
They were places to which students came to learn the Quran and the teaching of the religion. They came from all over the country, from very far, and sometimes from outside Morocco. They were lively places, where there were great teachers, mystics who came to deliver their message. They were places of thought, strongly intellectual places.
The El Atarin Madrasa is a Quranic university founded in 1323 by the Marinid Sultan Abu Said, whose decor is of breathtaking delicacy.
It is an art that is very inspired by geometry because, as you know, Islam forbids the depiction of the human figure. This is a very ornamental art, highly embellished and geometric, and one that corresponds to fixed principles that are extremely rigorous. This architecture is highly ornamental, as it appeals to the ingenuity of absolutely remarkable artisans.
The Islamic University Bu Inania Madrasa was built 30 years later, around 1350 and 1357, still during the Marinid dynasty. Its architecture is a true masterpiece of the Moorish art. It is particularly remarkable for its materials, such as carved stucco work in the arcades. The general plan is irregular because of its very location, but displays a certain degree of symmetry. The main entrance leads to a large central courtyard opening onto two smaller halls. This plan reminds one of the first plans from Iran. Its rich interior decoration is typical of all Marinid monuments, with its calligraphic mosaics, with its complex wooden carved star patterns. At the back of the courtyard, there's a prayer room constituted of two parallel naves with wood vaults underneath the ceiling. It comprises 4 onyx columns and a unique mihrab swelling out in the wall.
Madrasa are parallelepiped, large squares. They are places to study the Quran. On the ground floor, there were large study rooms, and on the upper floor, cells like those of monks, very Spartan, without running water. There were cells in which one or several students lived, although more often it was several. They piled in.
The Bu Inania Madrasa is the only madrasa in Fez with a minaret. It was both used as a college and as a mosque for Friday prayers. The old palace Darbata was built in the early 20th century under the reign of Sultan Moulay el-Hassan. It was accommodated as a museum of Moroccan arts and traditions in 1915, since the establishment of the French Protectorate. There is no doubt that its design was inspired by Hispano-Moorish architecture. Called the Green Monuments, the palace gardens built by the Sultan in the 19th century have been restored. During the Reconquista, Muslims and Jews were expelled from Spain. Entire Andalusian families had to move to Morocco. A symbiosis of the Judeo-Islamic culture once dominant in Andalusia regained a similar status in Fez. The country always had a strong Jewish minority, depending on political upheavals. The Jewish cemetery dates back to the 13th century. It is a very quiet place in such a noisy city.
La
The Jewish community was extremely important and brought a lot to the country because in Fez, the Jewish population worked in certain sectors. They weren't farmers, they weren't merchants, they worked with gold and silver and made absolutely remarkable jewellery. They were also pawnbrokers, often the bankers of sultans, and it was for that they were very respected and prosperous in Fez. In Morocco, the Jewish population reached up to 600,000 souls. But in 1956, virtually all of the Jews left Morocco. Israel was born and needed its people. The state of Israel put a lot of work into dissuading them from staying in Morocco. And today, no more than 3,000 Jewish residents remain.
A cultural and spiritual capital of Morocco, Fez is a millenary city. To visit Fez is to dive into the heart of its history. From the Idrisids to the Alawites, Andalusians or Jews, all the dynasties and all the people left their mark on this city. In the south, in Marrakesh, another great imperial city of Morocco, Marrakesh was founded in 1062 by a Berber king. Known as the Pearl of the South, or Ochre City, it has a population of around 900,000 inhabitants and is the country's tourist capital. The Koutoubia Mosque is a religious monument built in 1108. It is a good example of the traditional art of the Almohads, the ruling dynasty in Maghreb and Andalusia during the 12th and 13th centuries. The Berber Almohad dynasty promoted a rather austere architecture and a degree of asceticism. The Koutoubia Mosque has been designed in such a way. With its 77 meters in height, the minaret is the symbol of the city.
The Great Mosque of Morocco is called Koutoubia. That comes from Kutub, which means the book in Arabic, because at the time it was found in the center of a neighborhood that was called the Booksellers District. Leo Africanus tells in his writings that there are over 100 bookstores around the Koutoubia. Today, unfortunately, not many are left. The Koutoubia, which unfortunately one cannot visit, was probably built by sailors. Indeed, at the time they didn't have scaffolding like we do today, so in order to build those grand minarets, they had to be very agile and clever. They climbed ropes to go up and probably had to call on sailors to do it. On the inside, there are still engravings of the gallery boats of the era, so we think that the builders had some nostalgia for the sea and left their mark there.
Adjacent to the Koutoubia, the Jema El Fna Square is the main tourist attraction in Marrakesh. Like a court of miracles, the place is as lively and busy as possible. The beautiful and the ugly mix together in an amazing spectacle. Onlookers, musicians, shopkeepers, dancers, snake charmers, beggars, and healers constitute a heterogeneous and multicolored crowd. In 2001, Jema El Fna's cultural area was listed by UNESCO as a masterpiece of the oral and intangible heritage of humanity. World famous for its palm grove and minaret, the city is a real live show where people and local folklore are skillfully set in a medieval scene. Outside the square, narrow streets lead into the alleys of the Medina, which constitutes the focal point of the city, in order to discover this sometimes hidden heritage. The city's cultural heritage is really impressive. The Ben Youssef Madrasa is one of the most interesting monuments in the city. Built in the 16th century, this Islamic college, jewel of the Arab Andalusian architecture, is the largest madrasa of all the Maghreb. Its construction, ordered by the Saadian Sultan Al-Ghalib, was completed in 1570. The style of decoration is very classical, and one may admire the zellige, beautiful tiles, cedarwood carvings, and stucco adorning the building. Opposite to the entrance door, on the other side of the rectangular pool, a prayer room is divided by marble pillars into 3 naves. One nave leads to a small semicircular room with a richly decorated entrance. This room contains the mihrab, covered with a lace of carved plaster, forming cavities in the wall. For more than 4 centuries, the madrasa welcomed a lot of students and offered an education specialized in Quranic law.
To give you an idea, at the Ben Yusuf Madrasa in Marrakesh, they say there were more than 900 students. They were lodged and fed in the most frugal manner. They were given 1 small bread and a 1 tea per day, which is not a lot. So if they didn't have their own means, it was a little difficult to survive, but faith kept them alive. The students were as unruly as the ones we had at Sorbonne University in Paris that time. The Moroccan historian, Hamid Turki, defended the Ben Yusuf Madrasa in Marrakesh as a place enclosed by 4 walls into which they put the devils.
The Bahia Palace is an Arabic palace built in the late 19th century by the Moroccan architect El Mekki for the Grand Vizier Ahmed Ben Musa's personal use. It has splendid patios and green, refreshing Islamic gardens with orange trees, hibiscus and jasmines, irrigated by ketaras. Only a small portion of the palace can be visited. The other one is the royal family's property. Its building took 7 years. It has a single floor with 150 different rooms, with no set order, but opening onto courtyards, and all richly decorated with masharabiyas, marble, beechwood and cedarwood carvings or paintings, stucco, zellige, or Maghreb's first stained glass windows. Then, with the establishment of the French Protectorate in 1912, it became the personal residence of General Lyautey, who was the first French resident general in Morocco and added chimneys, heating, and electricity. The El Badi Palace, literally meaning the incomparable palace, is an architectural complex built in the late 16th century. This former palace was commissioned by the Saadian Sultan Ahmed al-Mansur to celebrate his victory over the Portuguese army in 1578. Today, it just consists of an immense esplanade with gardens, planting orange trees, and surrounded by high walls. Indeed, in 1696, the Alawite Sultan Moulay Ismail picked all the richest elements of the palace in order to build his imperial city of Meknes.
The Badi Palace was razed. Only ruins remain of the Saadian Palace. It is nevertheless very moving. When you visit these ruins, you have no idea what the palace was like. There are only descriptions.
A symbol of power, the palatial complex reflected the monarch's magnificence in the eyes of his subjects or to foreign embassies. It was the place for hosting solemn receptions and pompous feasts. Regarded as a jewel of Islamic art, its building was influenced by the Alhambra Palace in Granada, Spain. The remnants of the original building, which is thought to have consisted of 360 rooms and where storks now establish their nests, are open to the public and lit up each year for the Moroccan Folklore Festival. The Saadian tombs in Marrakesh date back from the time of the great Saadi Sultan Ahmed al-Mansur, who ruled between 1578 and 1603. Outside the building is a garden with the graves of soldiers and servants.
In 1917, 5 years after the French Protectorate, Tronchet de Lunel, who was the director of the Beaux-Arts office at the time of the Louté governor, was walking on the ramparts and saw domes emerging next to a mosque in the Kasbah. He had a curious spirit like all artists and Beaux-Arts directors and wondered what it was. He did some research and asked the Glaoui of the time for authorization to go into the domes. And inside, he discovered exceptionally beautiful tombs, worthy of the Renaissance, made of porphyry and Carrara marble, splendid. They were Saadian tombs. They were saved from ruin because they had been hidden. Voluntarily or not, we don't know. After this discovery, Louté asked for authorization to make excavations to clear them. Today you can go see these Saadian tombs.
The building is composed of 3 rooms. The most famous mausoleum is the room with 12 columns that contains the interments of about 60 members of the Saadi dynasty, including al-Mansur, his successors, and his family. The monuments are made of Italian Carrara marble. The mausoleum is a very good example of Hispano-Moorish decorative art. The tombs were only discovered 300 years later. Because of the beauty of their decoration, they have become a major attraction for visitors of Marrakesh. With its centuries-old olive trees, the Menara Gardens are especially known for their large central basin built in the 12th century under the Almohad dynasty.
The Almohads developed the art of the garden. The Menara, which can still be visited today, held pavilions in which the princes and their wives came to picnic and enjoy the flowers. The art of the garden, which came from Andalusia, was highly developed with irrigation in Marrakesh.
At one of its extremities stands a lovely pavilion built in the late 19th century. It is said that the sultans used to have romantic dates in the gardens. It is a pleasant place to end our Marrakesh visit, in a quiet atmosphere. Under Moulay Ismail's reign around 1700, Meknes was the capital of Morocco during the Alauite dynasty succeeding the Saadians.
Meknes is sadly somewhat forgotten today. That's why I call it Meknes the Melancholic. It is the unrealized dream of a great ruler, Moulay Ismail.
Moulay Ismail made Meknes his capital city for strategic, political, and geographical purposes. This Moroccan Louis XIV raised 40-kilometer-long ramparts and looted the ruins of Volubilis and the El Badi Palace of Marrakesh to build his imperial city. During Moulay Ismail's reign, Meknes knew a period of great prosperity. Some of the rampart's gates are exceptionally beautiful and make Meknes the capital of grand gateways.
Amongst the vestiges that remain, the lovely Bab el Mansour gate, possibly one of the most beautiful gates in Morocco, was immortalized by the painter Delacroix.
The Bab Mansour Gate was built in 1732 by a Christian architect who had converted to Islam. The gateway gives an access to the Kasbah situated on the El Hadim Square. The Alawite dynasty has ruled Morocco since the last Saadian sovereign's death in 1659 and keeps ruling the kingdom today. It is said that its members would be descendants of Muhammad. While enlarging the city, Moulay Ismail reorganized Morocco and ensured its pacification after leading a series of military expeditions against rebellious Berber tribes, the Ottoman Turks, and the Christians. When the weather is hot, it feels good to walk through the Medina's shaded alleyways and enjoy the freshness of a museum. It was not until the late 17th century and the arrival of the second ruler of the Alawite dynasty, Moulay Ismail, that Meknes became the #1 of the imperial cities. The city museum boasts a collection of objects that remind one of the city's golden ages. Furthermore, Meknes was nicknamed the Versailles of Morocco, or Little Paris, on account of its splendor, which gave it the title of the kingdom's most resplendent imperial city. Built in the 14th century by Sultan Abu al-Hassan from the Marinid dynasty, the madrasa is a Quranic school offering law and Muslim religion courses. The monument contains a large patio, a place for ablution, several classrooms, a prayer hall, and students' dormitory cells. It is a marvel of Islamic architecture. The central courtyard is a symbol of the Eastern elegance. The fine enameled faience mosaics and the gorgeous cedar wood carvings in the ceilings are remarkable. There is a student room behind each small wooden window on the first story. Adorned with its zalige, sculpted stucco work and wood carvings, the courtyard is the jewel of the madrasa. Moulay Ismail, founder of the Alawite dynasty who ruled Morocco in its capital of Meknes for 55 years, died in 1727 at the age of 82. He has the greatest longevity as an absolute monarch unto this day. Built in 1703, the mosque has become the mausoleum where his body lies at rest, surrounded by one of his wives and 2 of his sons. Moulay Ismail had no less than 500 concubines, with whom he had several hundred children, 1,042 more precisely, at the end of his reign. The mausoleum is one of the few religious monuments open to non-Muslims in Morocco. A series of patios lead to an ablutions courtyard where visitors have to take off their shoes because of its proximity with the holy place. We arrive then in the splendid mausoleum antechamber. There we can see, without entering because the access is restricted, the Sultan's richly decorated funeral chamber. Restored in 1960, the mausoleum has preserved its former glory and authenticity.
Moulay Ismail reigned at the same time as the French king, Louis XIV, with whom he maintained amusing and interesting relations. At the time, there was a republic of privateers in Salé, next to Rabat, and many Christian captives were imprisoned in Meknes. Louis XIV didn't deprive himself of having some captives either, who he had work in the galleys. Everyone had their own little business, and there was an exchange of ambassadors at the time to negotiate the problem of the release of the captives. Moulay Ismail sent an ambassador, the ambassador Benessia, who came back completely dazzled by the court of Louis XIV. He was especially dazzled by the beauty of the Princess of Conti, who was one of the recognized and legitimized daughters of Louis XIV, with whom he sang the praises to Moulay Ismail. Moulay Ismail, who considered himself a grand ruler, did not hesitate. They say that he had nearly 500 women in his harem, but he asked for the hand of the Princess of Conti, to no avail, of course.
Not far, an impressive building dominates the southern part of the city, the El Mansour Palace. Its name evokes another famous monument in Meknes, the Bab Mansour Gate. Indeed, the building of both monuments was supervised by the same architect, the converted El Mansour. The palace dates back to the end of Moulay Ismail's reign and constitutes an impressive vestige with a parallel pipe shape. The ground floor was used as a shop and the upper floors as a noble residence. In addition to its role as a watchtower and bastion, the El Mansour Palace could be used as an arms depot, grain tank, as well as a princely residence. Its height varies between 12 and 14 meters. You can see here that time has wrought changes.
One should keep in mind that the buildings of this era, continuing to very recent times, were built from raw earth, adobe, and were thus very fragile constructions. For this earthen habitat to be conserved, it needs to be renovated, maintained, and given a new coat each year. When a city or a house is abandoned, it is very quickly eaten by the humidity and crumbles.
In the southern part, you can see the Dar El Ma water house, a 319-meter-long water reservoir. Built under Moulay Ismail, it was used to irrigate Meknes gardens and provided the Medina with water. There are very few remains of that palace. The first building, perfectly preserved, hides a gigantic open sky construction with 23 naves supported by adobe pillars. The room's ceiling was originally 12 meters high. The Sultan used it as his stables, then as an arsenal, before it became a carpet manufactory. In 1755, the roof collapsed because of the shock waves from the Lisbon earthquake, which had reached all the way to Morocco. The only remains of the Moulay Ismail Palace are the big granaries, used to store the city's foodstuffs together with the grain and hay destined to feed the monarch's 12,000 horses.
One point where Moulay Ismail is very interesting is that he had a vision of the state and a vision of what the capital had to be in order to affirm its power. Meknes was an absolutely incredible city. It is in ruins today, but it was enclosed by over 25 kilometers of wall, inside of which Moulay Ismail had granaries constructed, which they say would have made it possible to resist a siege of 20 years, because he was a bit of a megalomaniac. From experience, he knew to be afraid of his rivals, who could besiege him at any moment and try to put an end to his reign. The granaries were gigantic. And the temperature of it all was regulated by a system of circulating underground water. When it got too hot or too cold, the water running beneath the granaries and the stud farm made it possible to regulate the temperature.
According to the writers of the time, Moulay Ismail's excessive fear of being besieged could explain the unimaginable reserves of the granaries, which, when fully filled, could have fed the whole city for 20 years. No siege actually lasted more than a week under his reign. The Dar Jamai Palace was built in 1882. It belonged to the Grand Vizier of Sultan Hassan I in the late 19th century. Its building lasted 2 years and reflects all Morocco's past splendors at the turn of the 20th century. In 1912, the French took possession of the monument and used its central part as a military hospital. In 1920, the whole building became the property of the Beaux-Arts Services and is now home to the Museum of Indigenous Arts. The Dar Jamai Museum is in true Arabic style. As evening comes, the crowd starts to gather for this unmissable convivial event. In the main square, there is something in the air, like a fresh breeze, a sense of freedom.
Morocco is a country that was very intriguing for writers and travellers because for a long time it was closed to the outside world. It was basically not until the French protectorate that anyone was able to go there. It was a country that many Westerners dreamed about. And when the French protectorate was established in 1912, l'UET invited an enormous amount of French writers, as well as Americans and those of various other nationalities, to visit the country, get to know it, and talk about it.
To discover the imperial cities and ancient capitals of Morocco is to travel through unceasingly renewed and breathtaking landscapes, as well as an architectural, cultural, artistic, and human heritage. Each one of these mythical cities was indeed founded by a great Arab or Berber dynasty, which made them their people's capital at some historical turning point. The presence of the court in a city determines the monumental aspect of its buildings, architectural improvement, art, and finally, its dimensions. World of vastness, refinement, and luxury, the royal city wears monuments which testify to the prestige of the prince in the eyes of his contemporaries and history.